This is Vocab Unit 5. Your first root is circum, which means around. And your first word is circumstantial. It's an adjective. It means secondary, incidental, or of little importance. The most common way you hear the word circumstantial is in circumstantial evidence. So circumstantial evidence would be like the fingerprint was at the scene. That doesn't mean that the person whose fingerprint it was committed the crime or was even there that day, but there was a fingerprint there at the scene. So here's my picture over there of someone examining some fingerprints. Your synonyms for circumstantial are coincidental and conjectural, and your antonym is direct. Your sample sentence says, when the prosecutor accused the defendant of lying to a police officer, it seemed circumstantial, as the man was on trial for a much more serious charge. So you see there, it was circumstantial that he lied to the police officer. It didn't really matter in terms of the larger case. Your next word is circumvent, which is a verb, and it means to go around or bypass, or to avoid, such as defeat, failure, unpleasantness, etc., by deception or outwitting. So avoid, I think, is your best way of remembering circumvent. Your synonyms are also pretty good, detour or evade, and your antonyms are allow or assist. So circumventing something can either be literally going around something. So this picture over here shows a closed road, so you would have to circumvent that closed road by going a longer way around. Similarly, you might want to circumvent a friend's locker if you had a fight with them, right? So you might go a different way. So it can literally be to go around something, or it can also be to avoid. So your sample sentence has that less literal definition. Carlos circumvented the no texting while driving law by having his fiancée hold up his phone so he could read it while driving. So he finds a way to kind of get around that law by doing something different. Or you could circumvent failure by studying for a test. Your next root is co, com, or con, which means with or together. You see this root all the time. So something like co-workers is a word that means people you work with. So that should be pretty easy to remember. Your first word is coalition, which is a noun, and it's a combination or alliance that's usually temporary. So if you see these people over here forming a coalition because they are shaking hands, deciding to work together to get something done. Your synonym is affiliation, and your antonym is dissociation. Your sample sentence says, in World War II, Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union joined an unlikely coalition with the United States and the United Kingdom to defeat Nazi Germany. So those countries formed a coalition or an alliance because they wanted to get something specific done. So usually form a coalition because you have a specific task that you want to accomplish. I gave you here common ways that it's used, so you would often say that they formed a coalition or someone joined a coalition. Your next word is concur, which is a verb. This is a really simple definition. It just means to agree. To accord an opinion is another way to say that, and then it also has a second definition, which can mean to occur at the same time. But we usually just have it meaning that first one, to agree. The synonyms are acquiesce and assent, both also mean to agree, and then your antonyms are argue and disagree. Your sample sentence says, when the citizen proposed putting in a stoplight at the dangerous intersection, the entire town committee concurred, and the light was installed within a month. So you'll notice you could just substitute the word agreed in for concurred. Two other ways to use it. You can just very simply be like, yes, I concur, when someone says something that you agree with, and then the question, do you concur, is do you agree? Your next root is sci, which means know, and you'll recognize that from the word science. Science is about knowledge. Your first word is conscience, which is a noun, and it means the inner sense of knowing what is right or wrong in one's conduct or motives. So, there's this little guy over here has kind of the two metaphorical men on his shoulders telling him what to do. So maybe one side of that is his conscience, which is the one that is telling him this is the right thing to do the right thing, and then the other one is telling him to do the wrong thing. So that conscience is what's telling you to do the right thing. Ways that you use that, I just wrote here, would be my conscience told me to do the right thing. My conscience told me not to steal that. My conscience told me I needed to tell the truth. And you can also have a guilty conscience. So if you know you've done something wrong, that inner sense of right and wrong is guilty, is saying, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Your synonym is principles, and your antonym is immorality. You may remember, hopefully, because it was the last root we went over, con means with, so conscience literally means knowing with unity or knowing wholly. And your sample sentence is, after taking his brother's final slice of pizza, he went out and bought an extra one to replace it because of his guilty conscience. Your next word is prescience. It's a noun, and it means foresight or the ability to know or predict things beforehand. So we've already had the root pre, which means before, so this is knowledge of things before they happen, or knowledge of the future. Your synonym is wisdom. Your helpful hint tells you that this word does not have anything to do with the supernatural or seeing the future in a literal sense. It refers to the ability to forecast the future accurately, not because you have magical powers, but because you are good at predicting what might happen next, or good at predicting the consequences of your actions. So there's a crystal ball over here, but someone who shows prescience does not actually have a crystal ball. They would just understand the consequences of their actions and understand what kinds of things are likely to happen in the future. Your sample sentence says, Yuki's uncanny prescience in the stock market allowed him to earn a pile of money and retire early. So he had prescience in the stock market, meaning that he could predict what stocks were going to go up and what stocks were going to go down, and that's how he made himself all this money. So just some ways to use it. You often refer to someone's prescience. So his prescience allowed him to do something, or I admire her prescience. Your next root is di, which means two. And your first word is dichotomy, which is a noun. Dichotomy, the definition I think is a little bit confusing, but I will give you lots of examples. So the definition is division into two parts, kinds, etc., or subdivision into halves or parts. So a dichotomy basically is a pair of opposite ideas. So to have a dichotomy, you need to imagine the world or a set of something as divided into two, and you can only be one or the other. So if you believe that there is a dichotomy between good and evil, you would say, well, everything in the world is either good or evil. Other examples, so that was the example I gave here, the dichotomy between good and evil. And then the second example I gave you is if you say there's a dichotomy between rich and poor, right? So that would mean that you can either be rich or poor. The world is split into those two categories. So you might say that's overly simplistic. There are no dichotomies. You can totally do that. And also the idea of a false dichotomy is important. So a false dichotomy would be a dichotomy that you'd say doesn't really exist. So a lot of people would argue, well, the world can't be neatly divided into good and evil. People move back and forth across that line, and people have both good and evil inside them, right? So you would say that there is a false dichotomy between good and evil, or you would say that someone was trying to force you into believing in a false dichotomy, or setting up a false dichotomy. No, it's not true that the world is actually divided like that. All right. Your synonym is difference, and your sample sentence is, when the group found themselves stranded on the island, they quickly established themselves into a rigid dichotomy of hunters and gatherers. So that would mean that they are either or some of them are hunters and some of them are gatherers, and all of them are one or the other, and none of them are both, right? The world is made up of hunters and gatherers. Your next word is digression. It's a noun and means the act of deviating or wandering away from the main topic or purpose in speaking or writing. or a passage or section that deviates from the central theme in speech or writing. Your synonyms are deflection or straying. I also like the word tangent as a synonym for digression. You go off on a digression. You go off on a tangent. Your antonym is directness. Your sample sentence says, some people wished his stories were more straightforward, but I enjoy my uncle's digressions when he speaks because sometimes his random tangents are the best parts of the story. So you see that word tangents in there too. Right, so a digression is when you go off topic. So you're talking about breakfast, and then you start talking about dessert, and that does not relate, right? It is a tangent. Your next word is E or X, which means out from or out of. And your first word is excise. It's a verb. It means to cut out from something or to charge a tax on something. So those two definitions are related because if you are charging a tax, you are excising a part of someone's income, right, or a part of someone's money. You're cutting it out and taking it for the government. Your sample sentence is, when the family needed to straighten out their budget, the first thing they excised were their non-essential purchases like trips to fancy restaurants. So you can excise something from your budget, you can excise something from your schedule. This over here is a literal excising of an organ. They're performing surgery, right? So it can be to cut out something literally or figuratively. Your next word is exculpate, which is a verb, and it means to clear from a charge of guilt or blame, or more simply, to prove that someone is innocent. Your synonyms are absolve or acquit. Your antonyms are blame and condemn. And your sample sentence says, when the guilty party confessed, Max was exculpated and released from prison. So if Max was in prison for a crime, someone else confessed, he was exculpated. Or you could have evidence that exculpates someone, right, that proves that they're innocent. So these handcuffs are empty because hopefully someone in them has been exculpated, they've been proven innocent and let go. Your next word is geo, which means earth, and your first word is geographer. It's a noun. It is a person who specializes in the study of the Earth's surface. So your sample sentence is, the geographers from the various cities met at a conference to discuss the effects of climate change on the plant life and soil in their native countries. So geography deals with the locations of countries, deals with things like where rivers are, where mountains are, anything that occurs like above the Earth's surface. So you have this map over here. Your next word is geology, which is a noun, and geology is the study of the earth, specifically its composition and history. So over here you have these rocks, right? So a geologist would study rocks and would understand things about like the different layers of rocks within the Earth's surface. So geology, part of geology is the study of like rocks and the composition of the earth. The helpful hint is super important. So geographers, so that first word, right? Geographers study what happens on the surface of the earth, for example, locations of rivers and mountains, natural borders, the spread of human cultures, land use, etc. Geologists study what the earth is made of, such as different rocks and minerals, and the way the landscape is formed, etc. So very simply, if we think about this as the Earth's surface, geologists are going to study what happens under the Earth's surface and what the Earth's surface is made out of, and geographers are going to study what's happening above the Earth's surface. And this helpful hint, again, kind of has that distinction for you a little bit more. Your sample sentence for geology down here is, because of the college courses she took in geology, she could still identify more than 50 different types of rocks in her neighborhood by sight. Your next root is im or in, which means into. There's a to here because you will remember that im and in also can mean not. So it can be a little bit tricky to figure out which one of those meanings you have, but both of these words in this unit are looking at im or in as into. Your first word is infuse, which is a verb, and it means to introduce as if by pouring something new in. And it's often followed by into. So you would infuse lime into water, or you would infuse mango flavor into water. You can also flip it around the other way. So like the way that I use it here is it was infused with lime, right? So you would infuse lime into water, or you would describe the water by saying it was infused with lime. Your second definition is to inspire, often followed by with. Or the third one is to soak in a liquid in order to extract an ingredient, which is similar to that first one. Your synonyms are impart and implant, and your sample sentence is the novice novelist couldn't help but infuse his plot lines with his own personal beliefs and issues, which made his books less enjoyable to read. So like to put something into something else would be to infuse. So your teachers try to infuse you with knowledge, right? To like let knowledge soak into you. And here's this picture of water infused with lime and possibly mint. Your next word is insightful, which is an adjective, and it means perceptive, able to notice things well. So if you are an insightful person, you are perceptive and you notice things well. You can also have an insightful, I'm looking down here, an insightful comment or an insightful essay would be a comment or an essay that is very perceptive and kind of like really deep. Like profound is actually a really good synonym for this too, another word that we've had, so I'll add that there, right? An insightful thought could be a profound thought. Your synonyms here are alert and astute, and your antonym is ignorant. Your sample sentence says, what made the art teacher so helpful was that her comments were so insightful, and she always knew what the students were trying to portray in their artwork. Your last root this week is pac, which means peace. And your first word is pacifist. It's a noun, and it is a person who is opposed to war or to violence of any kind. So you can consider yourself a pacifist if you do not believe in war or violence in any situation. Your synonyms are objector and peacemaker, and your antonyms are belligerent and unfriendly. The sample sentence says, after his second tour in the Korean War and the horrors he saw, my grandfather became a pacifist for the rest of his life. So he became someone who believes in peace and does not believe in war under any circumstances. Your next word is pacify, which is a verb, and it means to bring to a state of peace or tranquility or to quiet or calm. Your synonyms are ameliorate or make peace, and your antonyms are agitate or incite. Your sample sentence says very little could pacify the distraught couple whose home had just been robbed, right? So they could not be brought into a state of peacefulness because they were really upset that their home had been robbed. This picture is here because that girl has a pacifier in her mouth. So if you think about the connection between those two words, the purpose of a pacifier is to pacify a child and to make the child stop crying and be less upset.